Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm still traveling, so that's why the background looks different today. But been having a good time traveling. Been good conversations. We just did a YouTube video yesterday that we'll talk about in a moment. And quickly, let's jump into our main topic for today. The topic we're going to talk about today is opening up OneLake for fast adoption. Let's talk about how OneLake is changing what we build and maybe how we build it. And are there any other alternatives? I think I have some good opinions around some of this now. I'm starting to formulate some more ideas around this. Further testing required, but this will be, I think, a great discussion today, looking at how to leverage the lake houses within your Power BI development. Let's just jump over real quick. Any other news items? I have a brief news item, and I'll jump into that one if anyone else has anything else news related.
It's been quiet, kind of quiet on the blogs.
Microsoft Ignite is coming up. It is happening at the end of November, so it's probably not going to be too many announcements. They're holding news until Microsoft Ignite happens typically. So there's probably not going to be much we're going to see here in the next couple days or weeks until up to Ignite shows up. But once Ignite hits, I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of announcements at Ignite.
One of these conferences, I want them to announce it 3 weeks before and then spend the conference doing workshops and letting us actually just play around with it.
Never going to happen. Never going to happen.
Oh, just one of these times. So
I know it.
They're like, oh, that's so cool. When is that? Oh, October.
But then you take away, Tommy, all of the excitement from attending the event and being in the room when it's announced, and yeah.
To say I was there along with everyone on Twitter.
Right.
That was one of the moments that I when I was watching. Did you guys ever watch the SpaceX landing of their new? It was the Falcon Heavy rocket, where the rocket came down, was caught by the little arm things.
Yeah.
So I watched that live. I got a little like, wow, this is such a technological marvel. And it's kind of one of those things when we go to like the MVP summit or we go to like conferences like Fabric Conference, there's usually large announcements that are being made because Microsoft is trying to put a splash down of like what's coming. Those are extremely exciting to go to. And yeah, I'm very happy we now have a dedicated data and AI conference that is happening, which will be fun.
So Tommy, I think what you're proposing is like they should have a follow-up conference.
Yes.
yeah, exactly.
Which would be smaller, but it's like, hey, now that you've digested the stuff for a month, right, or a couple weeks, right? Like we're gonna have another follow-up conference.
Well,
or should it just be at the end of the conference?
We all know the dirty little secrets with any big company doing demos for the first time. It's by the seat of their pants, and that thing is not. They've never. How many times have they actually been on one of our conferences? They're like, "We're going to show you something, and it's available right now today. Just log in. Oh, there it is."
Sometimes I get what you're saying. Some of the future stuff, right? Might be in a video form or something, because it's about the idea. It's about like the thing that you're gonna get. Yeah. And is it fully baked all the time before they announce it? No, not always.
Here's what I'd like to propose to you, Tommy, because I think I think your idea is a great idea. What I think should happen is there should be other groups, like user groups or things like that. What should happen is user groups should be that force to drive let's get our hands on these new features after like a month after the actual event. So I would encourage you, if you're listening to the podcast and you're part of the community, when Microsoft has big events, what I think would be wise here is listen to those events, find what you think is interesting, build little mini sessions or workshops around that, and then run user groups on top of those events. So one thing I've been talking about with Tommy here for a while, I didn't do a good job this year. So maybe 2025 we'll do something. But after these big events, particularly the Las Vegas Fabric Conference, I'd love to do like a little Midwest mini Fabric Conference and do one just touring around a couple cities, jump in a couple Microsoft offices, and actually sit down and do, the same thing, but rehash the content, do a little bit more demos, because now the software's out, you can play with it, you can start seeing how it works. So I think that would be a wise idea. So free idea for anyone. If you're a user group leader, we recommend you go do that. That'd be amazing. Oh, one thing I'll have to admit here, for those of you who are listening who are user group leaders, Tommy, your user group is on Meetup, correct?
Oh, this is very good. Yes, it's been on Meetup for quite a while now.
So Microsoft has recently changed a pivot in direction on their user groups. Well, let's go through a little bit of user group history real quick.
Yeah.
We were in this thing called Dynamics Communities. They had their own website, their portal. We used that to kind of like get together, do groups and events. It was awesome. It was a good event. Microsoft said, hey, we're not going to work with Dynamics anymore. We're going to take over user group management and do it our way. Great. They built a new website. We were now user group leaders there, but it was very difficult to get meetings created and added and actually run our groups. Tommy kind of talked to me about, he said, look, Meetup is the way to go. It's the place to be. And Milwaukee user group, which is one that we help out with, Seth and I lead that one. That group, we kind of didn't use Meetup because we didn't want to pay for it. Well, if you're a user group leader for Power BI, you should definitely reach out to your community leads, because Microsoft now is offering a Meetup free subscription in their pro network. So Microsoft said, look, we know this is the best way to do it. We're going to give you a Meetup event. So if you're paying for Meetup or for your user group, or you want to start joining the Microsoft Meetup groups, you can transition from wherever you are to the Microsoft Pro network inside Meetup, and that will let you have a full Meetup for free. So I'd highly recommend other groups. If you are doing this, if you're running groups, if you have Meetups, make sure you reach out to community lead. If you actually need extra help with that, let us know. We'll help you get in touch with the right people. But I think it's a really good opportunity. I like the Meetup platform. I think it works well. It's easy. It's good.
I'm happy with this move.
Yeah.
One bit of historical before that, the original was like the original user groups were up straight through the community. So Microsoft was like trying to support it themselves. Then they engaged dynamic communities. And
okay.
And let's just say there was a strong recommendation right out of the gate to just use Meetup. So I'm glad that they're there now.
Yeah. I mean, you did bring up some really good memories. I probably was on that Dynamics site like at least three or four times a week, putting content up there.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was such a early middle 2000s type of website too. So
yeah, well, I mean, not to be critical, right? But like ultimately the goal of user groups is Meetup. It is to create an event. It is to get it to the widest audience possible and get people to a live event, right? I think along the way, the implementation of some of those things kind of created a second community of chatting and things like that, which kind of probably took away from the main Power BI site and yada, yada, right? Like, so, hey, we got a user group. We got people, we want to show up, put it into place where a lot of people go look for events, and Meetup is that place. So.
Yeah. And it's nice because if you are traveling, or if you're going places, you can actually say where, like, I go on trips, you can say, well, again, as MVPs, we like to speak wherever we can. And me as a business owner, I like to expense as much as I can. So if I'm traveling somewhere, I want to find a user group that I can jump into and be like, hey, I'm going to speak here, and then I can expense some stuff. So I like doing that. And Meetup, I think, just makes it so much easier from a searching for live events.
Yep.
Search for the word Power BI, search the word Microsoft Fabric, things just start seeming to show up. So anyways, just want to get that out there to people who are user group leaders. Please, if you want some free Meetup to run your user group, let us know, and we'll get you in contact with the right people. That being said, jumping into my final news item, and then we'll go into the main topic here. I have one more news item. I just did a YouTube video with Sid from the Microsoft product team. The Microsoft TMDL, that's an extension for the new format that they're using to build models and things, just went through a major update. Literally yesterday, 3 hours after it was released, Sid was like, hey, let's do a video on this. And we sat down on YouTube and we did a live demo of working with the TMDL editor for VS Code. Couple prerequisites. You have to have your reports in PBIR format. Your reports need to be linked or synced into, not PBIR, it's the PBIP project format. That's basically the format you're looking for. Those projects need to be synchronized with either Azure DevOps or GitHub, one of the two, doesn't really matter. But once you have those synchronized, you can then link your workspace directly to a Git repo. All the artifacts, the models, the reports, anything you build in the workspace will make objects inside that repo. And it was amazing. There's autocomplete. There's Copilot, GitHub Copilot, writing TMDL is amazing. You don't know how to write formatted strings. It does a good job of giving you how to write a formatted string inside a measure or column. You don't want to document things. You can highlight a whole bunch of code and say, document this section of code. It just did it. If you want
Wow.
to, yeah, you could say, make explicit measures on top of these columns and just list the name of the columns. It writes all the code to write all the explicit measures in one prompt or one command. So I was incredibly impressed with this new plugin because think of it, the TMDL format is files that are text, YAML basically, with some enhancements, but you now have all the richness of a very mature code editing studio. It is VS Code. I don't know if anyone uses this online. Our team is a very developer centric, and we use a thing called Live Share a lot. And it allows two people to work in the same VS Code environment together at the same time, writing code in the same file together. You can see people's cursors move around. It's like a game changer for people who develop. So if you have big models, if you have a team of people working on models together, to me, this is a no-brainer. Like this is like, yeah, you have to have this. This will greatly increase your productivity. And then the icing on the cake is anywhere you are in the code, I learned this yesterday, Control-I allows you to jump right into Copilot with whatever you have highlighted or selected, and Copilot will just give you a prompt window. You shove in your prompt and boom, out spits answers and solutions. And dude, I was sold. I was like, this is next level stuff at this point. Not to say that Copilot isn't good, but the GitHub Copilot is excellent.
Dude, this kind of goes along with my thinking when we think about dev tools, and everything is just going to VS Code. You take the TMDL extension, Gerald Buckler's 2 Power BI and Fabric Studio extensions, Synapse Remote, which basically will spawn your Spark server on your own machine. I mean, this is all within VS Code, man. So I know you want to say the desktop is the development tool, but still going to go with this. You can only edit the settings in JSON format type of development tool.
There continually is becoming more and more personas that are being supported by the Fabric environment, right? So it seems like we're growing a bit deep. So people say, oh, you're the business analyst and you're going to use tabular models and that's what your work is. I'm not sure I would throw that role all in one person like that. I really do think there's like this, I don't know how you describe it, but there's this really gray area for me where it's between you're not quite data engineering, but you're not quite the report analyst either. I really think there's this persona called the data modeler, right? Someone who really intently understands the semantic models, someone who knows how to shape the data and get it ready for star schema, performant models, large scale models. I mean, to me, that feels like a skill set. And I feel like Microsoft is putting that skill inside the data analyst or the analyst level of persona. And I disagree. I feel like it's more data engineering in nature. It's more code writing. And so that's why I like this extension for VS Code, because that pushes me more towards that data engineer level of things as opposed to the analyst level of things. I don't know. That's just maybe my opinion. I could be wrong on this one. I feel like there's more happening here.
I you know, with the description of those two roles, an analyst is not what you described.
Yes.
Because what you just described is somebody who is not the BI developer or the data engineer. It's the person with both of those experiences.
Yes.
Right.
We need both.
Because you're not going to be like, if you have so much work, right, that you have an individual that is creating the models on top of all of the engineered objects, right? You have to know how those ecosystems are going to work.
Yes.
Because you're teeing things up to work effectively in the model related to all the measures you're creating, how like you're going to build the filter contexts on all the pages, where can you put the transforms? Is that back in engineering? Does that have to be up front and forward? Like, so yeah, I would say you have to have both of those things to be that model. An analyst is not that. Like, they analyze data, right? Like, when that's my perspective anyway.
I agree with you. Anyways, really cool extension. I'm gonna go see if I can find the documentation on the VS Code extension not getting popped out. But anyways, I'll try and put that in the chat window here for you as well. But what I would recommend is, if you're going to go use the TMDL GitHub extension, or sorry, VS Code extension, make sure you go find it on the VS Code marketplace. It's the they have a little marketplace for all the extensions. Go there, search for TMDL. That's what you search for, and it's from Microsoft. It's just called TMDL, and it has no logo. Well, actually, that's changed. They just added it. So with this release, they should now have a new logo for the TMDL editor, or the TMDL extension, I guess. So that's been added too. So now there's a nice, pretty little TMDL file folder thing there, and apparently, in talking with Sid, there's a lot of other demos and use cases that Rui, the leader of this, is now teeing up. And there's going to be a whole bunch more announcements, teeing up educational pieces. So again, this is one of these things I think is going to kind of be landing a little bit more towards Ignite. There's going to be more information on this. There's going to be more demos around how great this is. So very excited about that. And then also another side note of this as well is I think the reason why they're doing some of this is Power BI Desktop is also going to be getting a TMDL editor as well. This was announced at Microsoft Fabric Conference in the main session and in one of the sessions that was done by Rui and his team as well. So we got some really great features coming for desktop, and I kind of like the fact that they're adding a whole lot more like code windows inside VS Code to help us build stuff. And man, I'm telling you, this is feeling less and less like
coming home. Is it coming home for you?
It is. This is feeling less and less like a BI tool. This is feeling more and more like a pro developer tool. I mean, desktop is really getting some I would like a better term. Desktop's really getting some horsepower here. Like, I think this is going to really let you extend these models quickly. It's going to let you automate a lot more things. The TMDL editor in desktop looks amazing. You can edit multiple measures at once. You're going to have GitHub Copilot. You're going to have regular Copilot on top of it there. It just seems like the right scenario. It's awesome. I'm very excited for where they're going with this. The development path here, I think, is very exciting for me. Anyways, I'm very pleased about that. All right, enough of any other news or our topic items. I'm going to...
No, just the only thing, when you said they had a logo, you're not talking about that paper icon and then it just says TMDL across it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
oh,
that's
okay.
it.
All right.
That's
all
the
right,
icon.
all right. That was no icon to me, but okay.
Yeah, it doesn't get a fancy thing. Apparently,
these are engineers, Tommy. Come on.
Yeah, marketing doesn't get involved for extensions. Apparently, I don't think they get involved for this. Let's hope not.
Copilot, generate an image for me in 2 seconds. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably exactly where it came from. Awesome. So main topic then. Let's transition over to main topic. So let's talk about this topic here. The topic is opening up OneLake for your fast adoption. All right, Tommy, give us some context. Where are you thinking about going with this one? Give us some talking points here, and we'll kind of unpack this as we go.
So when Fabric really kind of was first getting launched and the idea of OneLake, I think all immediately naturally went to the governance and the administration side of things. And I don't know about you guys, but the more I talk with clients about this and their different use cases, even the more side projects that I'm putting into Fabric, I'm finding it's almost too easy to get started with adding data and getting data stored in a lakehouse, which then immediately becomes something that I can query in a notebook, or I can create a report off right away. It's never been easier to immediately just get your data, not just something that can be like in a report, but something that's actually tangible in so many other places. If you have a workspace and you know a bit of Power Query, you're done. There's just a few tables that you need that comes from SharePoint, or maybe it's from some email subscription site that you have in your marketing, you now have your data that's in a structured, in a sense, database that you can do a ton with. So with that in mind, we've talked about this idea of rolling out Fabric, this idea of, we're going to identify the right teams who are going to treat it right, basically. But I think there's a kind of a different take on, could this easy way to get our data centralized and now it's all in the same place be one of the best selling components for adoption? And I think it's really talking about this data, this really being open to data. And we get everyone playing in our ecosystem, rather than, hey, if you want to see your stuff, you just got to go through this developer and this analyst, and then you can see your data nice and pretty. But now we can basically let others say, hey, you now have a lake house. Here's where it is. And I think that way is one way that we can even begin to govern this program. Yeah, it will be messy. Of course it will. But I think there's a lot of push here. So just wanted to kind of start that way.
Well, I'm going to make just a general observation at the beginning here. And this is, I think, what's forming a lot of where Microsoft is going on all this technology. I think the main shift I see here is, I think Synapse was trying to be what Fabric is today. It feels like when I talk with customers, what resonates with them is a single platform where you can use anything you want, whether it's SQL servers or VMs or it's functions or it's all the things that are like notebooks. Like I think users or customers want to have this unified data platform, and they can pick what is most comfortable to them. All this stuff works together. The challenge is none of the tools have the same format of data. So that's why we continually lifted and shifted data from SQL Server to blob storage, from SQL Server to data flows, and then data flows then to Power. Everything wanted a different way, like a different file format, basically. So I think what's happening here is where I think the great unification came from is Microsoft said, look, we're all going to standardize everything. We'll standard on the Delta Lake format. We're going to do that. When they made that decision, SQL Server can now, or SQL Serverless in Synapse was talking to Delta Lake tables. Awesome. They decided to make the semantic model just read directly from Lake, no import mode. This is where direct Lake comes from. I think that was a genius move, honestly. I think this is, I mean, the open standard of the Delta Lake format is, I think, the secret sauce. It's the single thread I see in every single tool Microsoft is now building. And everything Fabric related, it's all doing this on top of this Delta Parquet format. So I think once they made the shift and said, we're going to do this across all the tools were able to quickly unify themselves and say, look, we're all going to talk in the same language. Now we can truly have a Fabric environment where there's now a storage layer, and now there's multiple computes you can pick from. And so I think this is where we talk now is, okay, the OneLake, which I think was actually a smart move here. It's like a blob storage, Azure Data Lake Gen 2 storage, but it's a storage as a service. It's not storage as a blob item that you can go build. Does that make sense? Like, yeah, it's an API to go store, read and use stored information, as opposed to I'm not configuring the actual storage account and where the data goes. Microsoft just handles that. It's a service. So the service of OneLake, in addition to this new format of blob storage, this is like, yeah, this makes sense to me. This is the way we want to be going. I'll pause there. I said a lot of things. Your thoughts? Maybe Seth?
I agree.
Okay, moving on. Second point.
Yeah. Like I can regurgitate the same things, but I think that is one of the fundamental transformational things that makes this platform so different than other platforms out there, without stating the obvious that there are a lot of systems and storage locations within organizations, and a lot of those are local desktops, right, where data lives that is important to the business. Yep. And if there's a framework, and to your point, I think you leaned into the most important, which is you're transforming your data into a digestible format for any of these applications when you load it up there, right? So it's not just putting it in a central location. It's putting your data in a central location that is instantly accessible, provided you follow the rules, in that to all the tools.
Yep. And I think while this is a good thing, I think this comes with a downside. The downside is, how do I choose which compute engine to use? So let me give you an example, right? if I'm coming from structured data, let's say I have a SQL server somewhere, I'm going to connect to that SQL server and I'm going to land those tables inside OneLake or a lakehouse. Where do I start? Do I build a pipeline and do I create that data and do I land that data using a pipeline, using a copy activity into the lakehouse? Or do I create a pipeline and take the data, load it into a data warehouse, which also uses a storage layer under the hood that is OneLake? It still does the same thing, but in the data warehouse, it's now all SQL accessible, right? It's T-SQL now, and you can run store procedures on top of that data. The store procedures then, if they make new tables, makes more Delta format tables under the hood. So now you have two choices. Well, we have a third choice. Well, maybe I want to load the data in using Data Flows Gen 2. Now I have another one. Now, most of the other tools, and Data Flows Gen 2 will let you pick where you put the data. Am I going to put the data inside the data warehouse? Am I going to put it in a SQL server? Am I going to put it down as flat files? Or am I going to put it back down to the OneLake? We have options here. So I think this is a good problem to have, but I think now it becomes more of a technical question of which is the best system for my process. And I think this is where things get a little more difficult. Right now, my choice is, am I using OneLake or am I using data warehouse? This is kind of like where I'm just having some more projects now where we're doing more heavily data warehouse things. And I'm really trying to evaluate the difference between the two and figure out how to pick which one.
Yeah.
They're both really strong. It's hard to choose.
Let's back up just quickly before we get straight into the technology, because as much as I want to have that conversation, I think
Sure.
Let's talk about the adoption side too. What type of person are we saying, come over here, come join us in the Fabric community in our organization, right? They're probably not asking any of the questions that you just asked initially, because they've never asked those questions in their lives. So I think regardless of, there's a lot of probably one way is better to do it than the next. All of the choices that you said at least get that person for the first time started with actually getting their data in a centralized place where, that's kind of want to start, like, what type of people where we can, without them having to ask those questions, because before Fabric, you had to know what an Azure resource group was. You had to know all these things to spin up that instance, already have the knowledge permissions, know where to go and provide those permissions, where, again, right now it's just logging into Power BI and you can do the same thing. So, yeah.
No, I would say, go ahead, Seth.
No, I guess the question I have for you, Tommy, is, if we're talking about the business user, right? The users for wider adoption of moving files and folders and locations, where are they currently storing that stuff?
Everywhere. It's
no,
seriously,
specific big places.
So I am, without even being cliche here, because it never fails to amaze me. It's Excel. It's very, very in-depth and organized Excel files and processes that they put together just to try to get some semblance of their own database.
Sure.
A lot of times too, if they're not pushing to do a data engineer, they have some other third-party tool that's, at least they're pushing the data into SharePoint. A lot of times they don't already have, there are some kind of like mid tools where people can push files and it kind of auto generates. But for the most part, we're dealing with people who are either A, storing their data in local files or in some local system, or B, they're only really accessing all the data and they're getting all their information from either a Power BI report that someone's directly connected to, or the source systems themselves that already have basically that wall up between what they can actually look at.
So what would your proposed solution be? Like, if SharePoint is the place to share documents and see version history and have all these locations where it's been the only place where we could technically like put out an Excel file, right? And you got a bunch of browser experiences now with Excel Online. Like, are you suggesting that people throw all of that into OneLake?
So I'll do one before I answer the Excel one, because there's, I think, kind of a few directions there. Let's do a simple one that I see all the time, and I saw it all the time in marketing, where we have all this data and it's in like for email, our email campaign feeds and all the campaigns and the accounts and the users, and it's not in a structured way. And the only way they can get it is they had to either get someone who knew what an API was or query it. Where this becomes in a Fabric world where they go, hey, I just want to get this data in some table format that I can, in a sense, either pull a list from, and that's me just sitting with the person for maybe an hour. It's like, yeah, here's a thing called Power Query. You just connect with your credentials, see it here, and you're just going to push it to this place. There's a bunch of transformations. It's your data. Have a great time at it. So all of a sudden, someone who could only, in a sense, kind of query the data or only see a semblance view, because a lot of times the people who are relying on these source systems data need to do a lot with it besides just reporting.
Sure.
That now they can actually statically hold it in, again, whether it is files or it's actual, readable tables. And I think that's probably to me the most dead forward straightway.
I want to unpack what you're saying here, and Seth, I think your question was relevant. And Tommy, I know you're trying to move on to a new point here, but I have some beef with this conversation here. I think what you're observing, Tommy, is you're observing organizations that didn't have the tools or the skills in their teams to go get the data from the source. When I observe more access databases, when I observe more Excel files, when I observe more SharePoint usage, those things exist because someone didn't have access to where the data was living in a structured API-driven way. It was difficult to get it out. We weren't willing to spend the time. I've seen it over and over again. Many people, when you don't have access to the underlying source system or can't query it using a SQL endpoint, businesses are resource constrained at some degree. They're not going to give everyone production database access to these tables. And some organizations didn't have a good pattern of taking what was in production and moving it into a place where the business teams could go connect to it and do stuff. This is where Power BI Desktop came from. The reason Desktop exists is it made it easier for us to do data engineering. Power Query is the tool that you use to go access that data in wherever it lives. So instead of you having to have this whole monolithic, you're not logging into a server, you're not going into something that's production, you're not running queries against a machine that you may take down because you can't take down prod, right? You can't take it down. So we needed other ways of getting it out of there. And this is where I think Fabric is fitting very, very well, is we're now in a more decentralized way. The business is able to go in and automate their loads of their own data. Yes, there will be times where we still have to get flat files out, but the only reason flat files exist is because the upstream thing we can't access. We don't have access to it. So the default fallback for people to work with data is, well, I'll just export it to something, CSV or Excel, and then we'll just shape it from there and we'll go from there. I understand. It has to happen. It's not going away. But I'm just saying, as we move forward, I think there's a trend in general technology that's like, we're going to give you APIs. It's going to be driven with microservices. You're going to be able to get the data out in a not flat file way. And I think, to me, this is the linchpin of a lot of what's changing here, and particularly with OneLake, right? I'll say this another way. OneLake isn't the central place for data. OneLake is just a common way for anyone to access data and an easily securable and shareable system. That's what OneLake is. Because I can have two different workspaces and totally different data in both those workspaces. And if I don't have access to the workspace, I can't see it. I can't use it. We're not making a single lake for everything. We're making multiple lakes across everywhere. It's just really easy to manage the permissions between workspace A and workspace B. So we're not really making the central.
And it's a central data repository. So you don't have to move data anymore. You are permissioning it though.
I would agree with that. The OneLake is a central data store, yes, right. But like we're carving out, like, let's call it, like, if OneLake is the house, we're making rooms of data, and those rooms are permissioned by doors and locks on those doors or not, depending on what you're building. So, like, to me, the analogy holds really well. We have our business. Our business is now going to use OneLake, which is the structure of the office building, the house, and every room or office becomes the workspaces. And that's
like
where we
this,
put the data.
I like this room analogy because it's like there's going to be some doors I open. Nope, don't want to go in there.
Close that door. The floor in this room is a mess. We don't want to touch any of the data in that room. That's a mess waiting to happen. So, but anyways, I just want to throw that point in there. I think the world is changing, and this is why we're seeing the proliferation of OneLake and tools like Spark, data flows, Gen 2. It's in pipelines. It's helping us move that data from wherever it is to a place where we can use it.
So I don't know where I disagreed with you, because everything you said, I'm 1,000% agree with you. And I think to your point,
so just say you agree.
Yeah, we're good. We're good. we're cool. But, and maybe I misspoke, because I think a lot of the times, at least in the scenarios I'm thinking about, these are all these niche situations where different teams have some rogue software. They're not querying the business data, and they're trying to do this.
It's fine. I'm just making the point that I think the reason those things show up, I think the reason why you see SharePoint and flat files appear is because a lack of access to something else. That's the problem. The root cause is not, oh, Bob in marketing has done all these flat files things. This is a problem. That's not the issue. The issue is someone hasn't given proper access to the source system, wherever that may be, or it's a third-party tool where we're never going to get access to it, or the company we're working with doesn't have a good data extract process, and all they're going to give us is flat files, because that's the easy button. Hey, you want to get data? Make this query, run it, and here's the file. We'll email to you or whatever. Like that's the lazy man solution to get data out. That's the least amount of effort they can do to get you your information. Now, so I think we have a lot of new solutions for this. Sorry, Seth, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think what's interesting to me is there's two aspects of this conversation that I'm digesting. One is, and I'm taking cost aside from here, but one is this approach where Tommy's like, "Hey, let's all jump in the OneLake. It's nice and warm in here," what that's going to do is take all of the data that's already kind of duplicated, right, in the systems, to your point, because a lot of business folks don't have direct access to the source system of information, or it's transformed, or it comes through a report or whatever. You're going to dump that all in OneLake. What that does is the same thing that we're doing in SharePoint or on local machines, et cetera, is you have versions on versions and versions of data that may or may not come directly from a source system. I think what's interesting, Mike, in your description of, taking Tommy's question is, if there's one mode of adoption and just saying OneLake is the thing, everybody come on, there is another that maybe it's a pool instead where, we have to clean it, right? Like there's the people who are responsible for making sure the waters are nice. And I think that's where there's a huge opportunity for organizations where you start to roll out access to or build into the fabric, right? And OneLake, your data sources of certified data that maybe parts of the organization never had access to, that there are opportunities now, especially with the roles and the permissions and the more tight you can get on what types of data you can see from those source systems, right? Where you don't need the redundancy anymore. And there could be great opportunities where you roll through teams that are building their own things and saying, hey, you don't need that file on a file that you generate manually through this report, et cetera. This is just now accessible to you. Go build on top of this. Like you're going to get the latest, the best data right out of here instead of the 500,000 versions of Excel that people are generating and passing around. So I think that's what was unique in the conversation bit, that I was digesting between the two of you.
There's another feature here that's also very interesting as well. When you're working with SQL Server, Microsoft has opened up this thing called mirrored SQL. And mirrored SQL is the same situation. A mirroring SQL is this idea of, hey, the SQL Server, this is the holy grail of like all things data analytics, right? There's a system that runs the business. I need to be able to build reports on that. If I can have the data that's coming from the real system that's running our business as fast as possible in my reporting solution, we're done. I mean, that's the goal. The reason this isn't done everywhere, the reason we have SQL databases and batch nightly loads and all that, it's expensive to do that. Like it's not cheap to stream your data from the operational systems directly into your reporting systems. It's just not cheap. And the format of the data in the operational system is row-based. It's a single row. It's a table where I want to edit that row and not let other people destroy that row of data while I'm editing or creating or whatever. And in the reporting side, we're looking at like, I need to look at everything in a column. And so the whole data reading, we have to, the whole mentality of what we're trying to accomplish, it's two different objectives. And because of that, that's why I think, that's why we have these different systems. That's why we have these things, batch loading, nightly loads, extracts of files, shove it into SharePoint, like all these other things, because the existing data we have today doesn't support those needs. And I think this is where I have a lot of heartburn now to our topic specifically. Okay, where do we put it? I would rather put it in OneLake because I have files for that kind of stuff, and I have tables that make it very easy to work with. But on the other hand, I also have data warehouse, and I don't want to discredit data warehouse, because I think way back to your early part in the conversation, Tom, you said, what's the user persona we're talking about here? This is giving us new capabilities, and I think it's really going to depend on your background and how you're entering into Fabric. If you're coming in as a Excel, Power BI user, you're probably not going to be as thrilled about using a bunch of data warehousing things because you're not a T-SQL person. You don't know how to write it. It's not as comfortable for you. Yeah, maybe you can get around enough to get a query built into Power BI, but that's about all you know how to do. You're not comfortable there. But if you're a Seth and you show up and you're like, I am the DBA, right. Now this is a different story. The the data warehouse now might be a much better option for you, just because you can land the tables. It's still in Delta format. You still have accessibility to Direct Lake, just like you did everything else, but now you can write views, store procedures, and it's in the SQL engine. So for me, I'm thinking, okay, how do I make the decision between one tool or the other? If they both do roughly the same thing, is it now just a matter of what you're most comfortable with? Or is there some other consideration? Does doing an operation in the Lakehouse with a notebook, is that more expensive than running a SQL query in the SQL engine? So now I think I'm actually want to have more data. So I think there needs to be like a white paper or some data or some guidance around how much for these kinds of jobs should I be using the data warehouse, or for these kind of jobs should I be using Lakehouse and notebooks? I think that's kind of the dichotomy I'm kind of bouncing around in my head right now.
And a lot of that's past data source, though. What I can't get my head around is if I'm changing the structure of like how and where I as a business user access and organize my world of documents, right? Like that's SharePoint or it's local. So are we talking about like SharePoint and the solutions we have to share documents stays, but then we're going to say the files that are actual data sources that a lot of times relate to the same initiatives or the projects, whatever that we're managing in this singular location are now going to be separated, right? Like, what does that do for the business? What are we saying? Like, hey, yeah, move everything and now just operate on OneLake? Or are we saying to the business, guys, you have to think about data in a different way. Here's where we put all of the data things because they're going to be like, we're going to be able to extend that more. And the reason this is important to me is because what do we try to do like for a large swath? You want people to go to a single location, right? Every time we add another piece of software, you tend to lose a bit of a bit of people, right? Like they don't use that thing, or they don't know, like they don't know what they don't know. So if they know SharePoint and that's where it came in, how would they know unless somebody told them that all their data is in OneLake, right?
If you own a hammer, it's all, everything's a nail.
Exactly. So that's my question.
And I also see people fall back on what they know, right? When you get in the business world, you fall back to what you know, right? If something seems hard or difficult, or you're under a time crunch for anything, you fall back to what you know. I just was on a project recently. We were falling back to like, we're close. We can almost, we've got this API working. We got the data coming out. It's almost the way we want it. We should just throw it down. Let's just parse the JSON in Power Query. We can do it there. We know we can do it there. And I'm like, whoa. But that was a fallback mechanism of like, we were just falling back to what we knew and we're comfortable with. I'm like, that's not the right solution. The right solution is let's parse it as a table. It has to be right so we can just directly consume it. So if we spend a little bit more work on that data and push ourselves a bit more, we get a better solution on the output, and it makes it more automated. So, I mean, at the end of the day, for me, the best thing I want to be thinking about here is automation. Like whatever we're doing here, whatever we're building, the less I can have people moving physical files, that things can be automated, the happier I will be. And so there's nothing wrong with SharePoint. There's nothing wrong with storing files there. But if I can't 100% automate that and have the reloading process work consistently, the worst data source system that I ever connect to is Excel. It's just a pain. It's not that it's hard to connect to Excel. It's the fact that people can touch that Excel and change the data in ways that break my loading pipeline.
Sure.
And you have to be really sharp about protecting a lot about not screwing up those pipelines when users adjust things in those workbooks.
But at the same time, I think that is also something that business people could learn absolutely by getting into an ecosystem where you start connecting to these sources and use it. But a business person who uses Power BI already knows that as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, true.
Like, but I guess, Tommy, how do you answer my question? Like, if you're pushing and OneLake is going to be like the way we, start driving adoption, that's to me seems like something we need to be addressing.
And I think with to be frank, that's kind of the trade-off here with kind of just getting everybody on board, right? Where you're kind of creating these processes that at some point are going to have to be to, like, in a sense, leveled up to some type of automation. But I think the biggest kind of but here is, at least we've got people in the door, and if we're on like the data team, now we're spending time too with also understanding some of their data. But yeah, like the trade-off, if you're going to get the business user just connect to a lake house, well, they're going to have to do a few ways. They're going to do through pipeline, which nice, pretty user interface.
It's a little bit of a learning curve.
It's a little bit of a learning curve. Yes. Yeah.
I'd agree.
It looks easy, but I was like, what's a variable? And everything's under settings. Like a power, like data flow, which again, I spent half dashboard a day going through data flows, but the amount of people that I've trained on dashboard a day now, most people should be able to at least use a data flow. But if we're just connecting to, whether it's Excel files or straight force, they're not like, well, it's a nested JSON record. They tell me that, then okay, they're probably a developer too. But there is going to be some sign that they're not just, in a sense, copy pasting, right? So that part's almost eliminated, where it's not like, just log into Fabric and just put your content in there. They're going to have to use one of the source systems or one of the Fabric's tools to do that, albeit they can be very simple. We get them started in that, so where they now actually have that access, and they're probably going to want more from there. But it's just that it's almost like the trial run. We're going to give you 80% or 50% of what your data can do. If you want to sign up for the rest, then it goes through the more, in a sense, standard process. I don't know if that's answering your question, because there's really no good way to answer to say, we're going to just fast track them to go to the medallion, the engineering approach. I don't think that's, not that it's not doable, but I mean, that's not going to work in terms of someone becoming an ownership of their data, and then two, being able to at least get started with that if that's what we want.
I see what you're saying, Tommy. It sounds like you're making a case for, I hear what you're saying, but the business is going to do what it's going to do, and it's just going to have files all over the place, and we're not going to move forward. And I mean, maybe that's not your point, but like Enterprise AR has a really good point here in the chat. He says, people could learn, that is a thing, but the business side response sometimes is, not my job, not my problem, I'm not going to learn it, not my technology. And I think what we're seeing here, particularly with Fabric, is we're blending like never before the tools that straight IT used to use and what the business could use. And so I'd really challenge people in this area. And again, let me just put my thinking cap on and my dream hat. Like, I'm gonna dream here for a minute, so just bear with me while I get a little bit abstract, right? What we need is, we need the ability for people to go into like Excel and say, I'm going to make a table. And inside that table, I need hard restrictions on that table saying this table has 5 columns. You cannot change them. You cannot rename them. You can add more data in the columns of the table. Fine. If you want to, and have the option of adding additional columns if you need them or not. So one word of advice I'll give people who are working with like data on the side, and because the operational system, the data we bring in, there's no way that we have all the information we want. The way marketing wants to group things by, there's missing information. Some team didn't do it upstream. Instead of fixing the problem, we need supplemental data to add to our normal data extraction to make the reporting work. Basically, it happens everywhere. It's so common that it's like you just got to plan for it at this point. So my point here is, if you enhance the Excel experience, or if we had a better, let's ignore Excel. Let's just say I had a better table experience where I could go in and make formulas, lock columns down, start doing a little bit of hardening around the table structure, but still let people build things in a flexible way, in an Excel-like way. I think that would go a long way here. That would make it very easy for us to have these registered tables of information that we can then easily use, manipulate, use as if it was Excel. We have really tight requirements around it. That's what the business wants. They want to be able to go to a table, edit any cell anywhere in the table, adjust it, modify it, tweak it, arrange it, and then now that immediately gets pulled into the rest of the data information. That's what we want.
Yeah, and that's Mike. I think that's exactly what I'm trying to say is that they're just not looking to push files into a different place, because that's what's the value add there. But the reason why people are exporting random files, and the reason why they have these elaborate kind of workflows, is because there are certain points I need to extract some of the information that's not available in a way that I need it. And I don't have any control with the systems or how it is to easily do that. So now we're, again, to your point, we're going to go through that with Fabric, where it actually can be something that they can now be tangible to them. Where if I just want a view of these 5 columns, because I need that every week for yada, yada, you could literally just create a view in a SQL warehouse, or have that as a table in Fabric.
But you got to know how to do it. This is my problem. Like,
but that's,
you know how to do it.
It's completely different than where you started, right? If you're saying the value, like the value outcomes of Fabric and the accessibility of those objects to other teams is a value add, that is not, hey, can we drive adoption with throwing everything into OneLake? That's a completely separate topic. Is there value there? 100% there is. And I think that goes and drives back into the other point that Mike was making earlier, which was if you're going to go down this path of putting everything in OneLake, then it should be in that managed space where you're creating value objects that the business can use, as opposed to just dumping everything into OneLake. But like, that's why I said they're 2 completely different topics. So if we're talking, do you bring business users into OneLake, right? Or you move how they operate in the business to a different location? That's not the same as enterprise teams building value add to the business so they don't need all those objects.
Yeah, and obviously that I think that's where I'm struggling with. But just for the record, I have not opened up my heart and my arms to every consumer or business user comes to me now to get into Fabric and Fabric everything. But I'm definitely entertaining different use cases, and I think like what I'm going to be trying to do at the very least is be more open to it. But I think there's probably going to have to be identifying candidates for this, and I think there will be some demand for this. And I think rather than we're going to always have to go to the business, say, can we get your data cleaner, please? Where it's almost where, to me, it's, does a team or business in this, in this situation that we're dealing with, have some technical abilities, or, basically whatever the prerequisites that we're looking for. I don't think they're as high as the data engineer they need to be. But obviously, we're not going to just push this to everyone, even if they're not going to own it or do anything with it. And to your point, if someone's reply is, that's just more work. It's not my job. It's not my system. That's not what we'd be trying to do anyways. We're not trying to push everything to Fabric right now. But I think there's a lot of situations right now with a lot of people who, if you told them how easy it would be to really manage and run with their teams and business data, they would be on board.
So I think this is moving into a different direction, right? Which I'm fine with. But what you just described as one of the challenges of like, hey, we don't have owners of data, right? That's the whole point of mesh and all of what Fabric is designed to do. Is if we came to the owners of data and we said, hey, you're now a domain owner. You're a domain owner of your domain, the business, right? There's an ecosystem, Fabric, by which we're going to plug into your data. How do you want us to do that? Right? And if the answer is not my problem, here's the Excel files, like fine, that's what you're putting in OneLake. Because that, if you're going to them and you're saying you are responsible for the output of information that we're going to plug into, and you're responsible for updating these files in this shared location because this is what we're going to use or report on or do whatever, and you own it. Now, there are a bunch of other opportunities for you, right? We can plug you into the source systems. We can make sure your data gets cleaned through these processes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the whole point is that these teams put skin in the game, because without skin in the game, you get the problem that you have, which is, oh my gosh, we have a million different data sources and nobody's putting any thought or process behind it, process behind it. And what is the end outcome? It's the comment in the chat, which is nobody cares because it's not my problem. But it is your problem because it should be their problem because they're the subject matter experts. Yes. So I think that's where this door opens a little bit more in terms of, if you're in Fabric, what do you do? What do you say to the business? We want their data accessible. We want it discoverable. We want it to be usable. So where do we tell them to go put it? Tell them go put it in OneLake. But there has to be some thought and planning around why you're asking the business to do this, because you have to give them something back in return. And that's what we're kind of talking about with like the better, more accessible, streamlined versions of like data from systems that they can access, as opposed to, no, we're not going to like grant permissions to a SQL server when nobody on that business team knows how to write SQL. That would be dumb, right? So I think as long as organizations are going like in that mode, 100%, you're bringing them in and you're forcing a change, albeit now maybe my documents are in SharePoint, but if I have to look through this lens of the information that's coming out of my area has to be part of this known ecosystem because it's a mandate, because an organization can look at things and go, holy cow, there's a lot of value here if we implement a Fabric ecosystem where I have owners of data, and then I can sick this team, or I can hire Mike and to come in and organize this for me so that all these teams are operating in such a way that I'm getting the most value out of my data. And that's what I think is the most like exciting part about everything in Fabric, and what OneLake provides is, hey, now everything is in a digestible form so that whatever technical team is going to help implement things, or if we're going to hire some people or the domain already has the technical resources, we're all working on the same platform, and it's a permissions thing. Hey, business unit over here, I need access to your data. We're pulling this thing. What are your shareable files? Like, give me access to them. Boom, they're instantly accessible, and I can plug into them. Right? Walk me through, how do we do this? What are we doing here? Hey, I see you have 1 million Excel files. I'm looking at the data here. Do you know that we can do this and this and this? Right? You're improving the business domain value, right? Because you're giving them accessible things, but you're also helping the wider part of the organization like build better data. And that's why I think we've been missing, because you don't have that visibility in all the systems that we do right now, because you're just pushing and pulling, right? So I think if I'm rounding out like where we started, where we think, that would be my final thought.
I like that. That's a good final thought. And I think a lot of this, what we're talking about here, this is a great talking point around the intersection between data culture and what your team can do and handle technology-wise. So I think this is a great point to communicate, discuss, work through. I think my final thought here is, ask the question why those flat files or SharePoint or other items are existing. I love your point there, Seth, around, okay, well, let's work with them. To me, this whole conversation reeks of the concept of ownership. Who's taking ownership of the data? Where's the break line between the business and the IT or the BI team? Who's going to take ownership of getting the data into a central place to be usable? Tommy, any final words from you?
No, I really think there's going to be a lot of different roles that are going to come up as a Fabric, where it is kind of that either onboarding person, or we've talked about that liaison between the business and the technology before, but I think never more than with Fabric.
Awesome. Well, that being said, we really appreciate your time. We know your week or hours are very valuable, and we appreciate you spending your time with us through the podcast. So if you don't mind, please make sure you give us a thumbs up or a like or subscribe so you can hear about us when we're coming up with new videos in the future here. We do appreciate your ears, but we'd love to have more. So if you wouldn't mind, share this podcast with other people you might think this is valuable with. Hopefully this gives a couple talking points for you to unpack, think about, really review your data culture, and how does it work? How would you fit your data culture with what OneLake is doing? Maybe you need to do some process change around the data things that you're working on. And in doing that, you can then start really fully leveraging OneLake to make things easier, faster, and automated. Tommy, over to you. Where else can you hear about the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. If you have an idea, a question, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode, head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all of powerbi.tips social media channels.
Awesome. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.